You know, guys are always going to drop in the draft for one reason or another. Maybe it's a big-time health concern. Maybe they didn't interview too well. Maybe they weren't great coming back from injury. So many different variables go into what makes a player undrafted, regardless of skill, regardless of what they put out on tape. And there were a bunch of really, really good players this year, like there are every year, that went undrafted. We're going to talk about some of them today. And in fact, in some situations, we're going to talk about where they landed. Because some of these guys, such as one of my favorite players in the entire draft, Marvin Wilson, fell completely out of the top 7 rounds, and he was signed to the Browns before the last pick was even read out on TV. So let's talk about some of my top undrafted rookie free agents, and in some cases where they actually have signed already. At quarterback, Jamie Newman was inside my top 200 players, and Jamie Newman's a really, really interesting player. He's extremely inconsistent and raw as a player overall, but the arm talent is there. He flashes as a passer, and he's also really, really good running the football. Doesn't have all-world speed, but you can see he's built pretty big, 6'3", 235, and he runs QB power really, really effectively at times. But that's not what you want from him in the NFL. You want to be able to make these throws, and he can throw the ball down the field very well. It's just the inconsistency in the short and intermediate areas of the field that really, really let Jamie Newman fall in this draft, I would say. In a not super strong quarterback class outside of the top guys, and don't get me wrong, these top 5 guys were all definitely worthy of going as high as they did in some cases. I'm not super high on Mac Jones, but these top 4 guys were incredible, at least. But outside of that, were a lot of question marks with the quarterbacks. Jamie Newman has actually signed with the Eagles, and I think there's a chance, if he makes the roster, that he could eventually compete for the starting job within 3 or 4 years. I like Jamie Newman as a player, but he's got a long way to go. Next up, let's talk about some wide receivers that went undrafted. A lot of these receivers ended up going fairly high, but K. Johnson went undrafted, and I'm a huge K. Johnson guy. You're talking about one of the most unguardable players at the Senior Bowl, and the Senior Bowl in Mobile, for those who do not know, is every senior that gets an invite, you have to be expressly invited to attend. So it's some of the top seniors in the entire class. K. Johnson not only had an invite to the Senior Bowl, he played his tail off. He was one of the most unguardable players in one-on-ones. And to me, that's extremely valuable. A guy that can't be covered in space has league value, in my opinion. This is a big-time slot receiver that I think brings value to a team long-term. Yeah, he does have return value as well, but K. Johnson going undrafted to me was wild. I thought for sure this was a guy that was going to go maybe round 4 through round 6, and I thought maybe even round 3 at the highest. Completely undrafted. I think it was crazy. He signed with Seattle. I think there's a chance that he can make that roster. These guys have an uphill battle, though. Some of these guys who go undrafted just won't end up making the team. Tamorrion Terry is another one where I like Tamorrion Terry as a player. He is like the light version of DK Metcalf. He's a big-time deep threat, big-bodied, isn't the best at playing through contact and going up and making these contested catches. He works better just deep ball tracking down the field, but I like Tamorrion Terry. He's got an extra gear, runs pretty well, even though it's not like he tested crazy well, didn't run 4.3 or anything, but was in the 4.4s, maybe low 4.5, I can't remember exactly, but I think he was in the 4.4s, but the tape speaks for itself. Plays very fast on tape, and he is a big-time, big-body deep threat that has a frame where he can gain mass and be more physical at the catch point. So I like Tamorrion Terry as a player. I'm shocked to see him go undrafted as well. He also signed with the Seattle Seahawks. Josh Imatorbhebhe was a guy that I thought a team was going to take a shot at. He's a really, really good athlete. Based on his testing, which was not done at the Combine, but his vertical jump would have been an NFL Combine record, and that plays on tape as well. It's not like he can just jump high and isn't great at a high point in the football. He's a really, really good, like, red zone threat style receiver who's also decent after the catch. I feel like he's underrated in that regard. He's got pretty good hands. He's not an elite separator in the short and intermediate areas of the field, but on the back end of your roster, as a guy that can get down the field and use his strength, use his body, and use his instincts on the sideline to make catches and make plays and get in the end zone, I like Josh Imatorbhebhe a lot. I thought he was a guy that was probably going to go back end of the draft, 5th to 7th round, and for him to go completely undrafted, again, all of these really surprised me because I think these are really good players. And Josh Imatorbhebhe is with the Jags now. Another player, in my opinion, who's similar to Josh Imatorbhebhe in some regards is Austin Watkins out of UAB. Another decent-sized receiver with pretty good speed and is physical at the catch point as well. This is a red zone threat style receiver. He's also really good after the catch as well. So Austin Watkins was someone that I thought was maybe even going to go higher than the 5th to the 7th round because he is a really solid athlete and he is so great with the football in the air. Undrafted, Austin Watkins is not signed as I record this. Sage Surratt snuck into my top 200. He's another big-time jump ball receiver. Decent deep threat as well. He's got the size. He's not overly explosive, but again, is another player who's good with the football in the air. And you can see how the league values these guys because the big-time down-the-field jump ball receivers just didn't get drafted very highly. We're talking about a few of them in a row now in Sage Surratt, in Austin Watkins, in Josh Imatorbhebhe. I say Josh. I feel like I always do that. In Josh Imatorbhebhe. Sage Surratt is another one of these guys. He isn't the biggest athlete, so I guess it's not overly surprising if those guys didn't get drafted that he didn't, but he has really good hands. He's great with the ball in the air. He, as I record this, has signed with the Lions. So based on the receiver talent on that team, I think there's a good chance he can compete and make the roster. A player that just missed out making my top 200 was David Moore. I saw some comments about him. He impressed me at the Senior Bowl, but I went back, I watched him at Grambling, didn't have any all-22, so it was a really tough evaluation for me. So I was pretty much going on mostly what I saw at the Senior Bowl. Just thought he was a little bit raw. Isn't the best mover in space, but he's, 6'1.5", 350. He's a really huge body. I thought of him as like a budget Deontay Brown type player. So there is a value to that, but he just didn't quite make the top 200 for me, but he went undrafted. And David Moore, as I record this, signed with the Panthers. They've beefed up their interior a little bit on the offensive line, so I'm not sure that he's a lock to make the roster or anything like that, but I think he's a really solid player. Almost a top 200 player in the draft for me. He was just on the outside. I think there's a chance he could compete and make a roster spot, of course, as with all these guys, but he was one of the better undrafted interior offensive linemen. I was really disappointed to not see Kenny Yeboah get drafted because he's a player I liked. He made some big-time plays. He's good with the ball in the air. And for the Ole Miss Rebels, I thought Kenny Yeboah was a surprising playmaker. You didn't really have the type of hype around him because Elijah Moore was there, and I think that really took away from Kenny Yeboah's potential targets. But this is someone who's a pretty solid player. I think he could be a second or third tight end on the team, blocks fairly well, but has the prototypical tight end size. He's not overly athletic, but he's got good hands. I think he's going to be good in the red zone. And if he makes a team, I could see him earning a second or third tight end spot on a team easily. We got to talk about Marvin Wilson. Listen, I'm catching a lot of flack right now for having Marvin Wilson as IDL1, and I'm happy to explain this. Like, Levi Onwuzurike had 1 year of production off that out of 2020. Christian Barmore is not on the field on a lot of plays, is a pass rusher only at this point. Great size, played great down the stretch for Alabama. I like Christian Barmore's potential long-term. Davion Nixon had apparent character concerns. Another guy with really 1 year of production. Ali McNeil's a nose tackle. Milton Williams is a real good athlete who's a little bit undersized for the position. Same thing with Osa Odigizua. Not quite the athlete that Milton Williams is. Kyrus Tonga's a guy that almost went undrafted as well. But Marvin Wilson, for me, is a guy that can do it all. He is 6'3", I think about 6'4", over 300 pounds. He looks a little bit heavier on this list than I had him. I had him at like 305, I think, based off maybe the Florida State website. I like Marvin Wilson a lot, clearly. Here's why. He was very good in 2018. He was exceptional in 2019. Marvin Wilson, in 2020, in a three-man front at Florida State, was forced to play the edge on a lot of downs in that particular formation where they're in a three-man front. I know they had Kando off the edge. I know Janarius Robinson. But Marvin Wilson wasn't in a particularly great situation to succeed in 2020, and he did so playing on a torn meniscus. I think the injury in that fashion, the torn meniscus, definitely scared teams away and dropped him in the draft. Maybe the injury is more severe than it seems like. But Marvin Wilson in 2018 and 2019 was a very, very good player. In 2020, due to all these certain circumstances, wasn't the same player. And the injury concerns I understand. But Marvin Wilson in 2019, his 2019 tape is better than any other defensive tackle in the class, in my opinion. Take that for what it's worth. You don't have to value that. I don't care. Based on what I saw, based on how I feel is for Marvin Wilson, I'm going to stand on the table and I'm going to say Marvin Wilson is a guy that absolutely should have been drafted. I love him as a player based off 2019. If you watch him in 2020, I can understand not loving Marvin Wilson as a player. Understandable that he went drafted based off 2020. But based off the previous years, to me, there was no reason that Marvin Wilson should have still been available with the last pick in the 7th round. He was a priority free agent for a lot of teams. According to reports, there was a bidding war, and he was signed literally the moment the draft ended in real time. He signed a $30,000 signing bonus for an undrafted free agent with $175,000, I think, guaranteed in base salary. So this is not only a guy that's going to compete for a roster spot. Marvin Wilson's going to make the team. There was a bidding war for him. The fact that he didn't get drafted is crazy. I think he's going to be a solid rotational tackle that could work his way up into being a starter. This is a guy that can two-gap. This is a guy that can get pressure on the quarterback from the inside. I love Marvin Wilson, and I don't care what anyone else thinks. I'm going to tell you how I feel. Another D tackle that snuck into my top 200 was Darius Stills. He went undrafted. He, at the moment of recording, has not signed, but I like Darius Stills a lot. He's a little bit undersized for position, but he's pretty athletic and he's quick. I think part of that quickness comes because he is a smaller defensive tackle, but Darius Stills was someone who popped on tape. He has a brother as well. I forget the name of him. I think it's another D, Stills. I'm not going to come up with it, but I thought he was going to be drafted, or he was draft eligible, but he didn't declare. Only Darius Stills in this draft went undrafted. Another guy that I just thought was too good of a player to drop all the way down, especially in a poor IDL class. So I think he's going to be a good rotational pass rush specialist D tackle. It'll be interesting to see what team he signs with and if he makes a roster or not. Hamilcar Rashed was near my top 150 at 159. Right now, I think he's a primary pass rush specialist. He's a 3-4 outside linebacker that probably just is not going to be an every down player, at least not right away. But Rashed is someone who can fly off the edge, really athletic, fairly bendy as well. So I was surprised he went undrafted as well. I know I keep saying that, but I'm really, really surprised. I liked him as a player. Didn't love him as a player, obviously, but I liked him as a player. I thought he was probably a guy that would go somewhere around round 3 to round 5. Undrafted, as I record this, he is also unsigned. He's not listed here as an edge, but I like him as an edge. Also another guy near my top 150 at 153, Charles Snowden. He is extremely light. He's about 6'7". I know it's 6'6" here. He's 6'7", about 230, 240 pounds. He's just really lanky, and he doesn't have any functional play strength, which I think is a big issue for him. But he's someone that can fly off the edge. Bendy for his size, moves well in space for his size. We got to remember, he is 6'7", 230 to 240 pounds. I think he bulked up a little bit. I like his potential. He's a developmental guy that immediately is a pass rush only type edge guy. He's not someone that's going to set the edge with that frame or with that functional strength. But I think the fact that Charles Snowden went undrafted is criminal. He was a guy that really flashed at Virginia at times. He signed with the Bears as I record this, which I think is a perfect situation spot for him as a 3-4 outside linebacker with Khalil Mack on one side. Does he make the roster? Who knows? But I think in pass rush downs, Charles Snowden can play a big impact. Dylan Moses was a name that came up a lot and a lot and a lot all throughout day 3. I think people thought he was going to go day 2 as well. Here's the deal with Dylan Moses. He was a really, really good player a few years ago. That's kind of where we are. He tore his ACL, was not the same player last year. I don't know if he thought my draft stock is secured. I'm not going to play quite as hard as maybe I can. Maybe look at Grant Delpit last year for the same type of situation. But Dylan Moses, I think the big thing with him is he tore his ACL and was just not the same player at all. Whether that was by design, trying to stay healthy for the draft in 2021, I'm not sure. I can't speak on it. All I can tell you is Dylan Moses was not a very good player on tape in 2020, and that could have scared a lot of teams off. If you get the 2018 Dylan Moses pre-injury, I think you're going to get a really good player, and the Jags signed him. I think it's perfect to take a shot at this guy as a priority undrafted free agent. I am surprised he went undrafted just because he has ideal size for the position, 6'3", 235, 240, and is a great athlete. It just depends how that ACL recovery is going to work. If he's already back to 100% and that's just the player he is now, that's going to be pretty sad. But Dylan Moses has shown us he could develop into a really, really good player based on the flashes we saw in 2018. It's going to be up to him to develop, make the team, and turn into this great stud that he has the potential to be. Now, DJ Daniel didn't quite make my top 200 either. He was pretty close as well. And DJ Daniel kind of rose up for me for one reason and one reason alone. He is feisty. He's a feisty cornerback. He looks longer on tape than he actually is. He's 5'11 and a half, but I think he has long arms. And he was a guy that was capable of pressing guys at the line. And I think in a type of system where he can just go press bail and be instinctive in zone coverage, I think DJ Daniels is going to be fairly good. He was a guy who gave Jamar Chase some trouble when LSU and Georgia played in 2019. So I like that on a couple plays where he was in Jamar Chase's face and shoving him out of bounds and things like that on routes, catching Jamar Chase at bad times. So I think his timing as a cornerback as well. Does he have the athleticism to mirror and match down the field and stay in phase? That's a big question mark. But as someone that went undrafted, I think DJ Daniel has a good chance to make a roster and at least be a contributor on special teams long term. I like DJ Daniel. Surprised he went undrafted. And the last one for me is our Darius Washington, number 107 on my big board. And it's not a huge shock, I guess, that he went undrafted. He's 5'8", 180, really small, and he didn't really test that well. He's not this unbelievable athlete. What our Darius Washington is, though, in my opinion, is a good football player with great instincts. He makes up for his lack of deep speed by being instinctive and being able to read the quarterback really, really well in zone coverage. This is a guy who's not scared to come up and play like a linebacker in some instances. I know he's 5'8", 180, but he plays bigger than that. He plays more aggressive than that. He doesn't play like a guy who's, 5'8", 180, just kind of diving out of the way, going for guys' ankles. He's not afraid to meet you, tackle at the hips, and wrap up. Our Darius Washington's a good football player with good ball skills that I think would make a pretty good nickel cornerback at the next level. Maybe as a guy that rotates in dime packages, something like that. But I think he should definitely make a team. I think he's a special teams player at first, but could end up being a starting nickel cornerback within his rookie contract. Won't happen necessarily for sure, but I think there's a chance that it could happen. Those are my big undrafted players that I was shocked when undrafted and that I think could end up being contributors for NFL teams in 2021 and beyond. So yeah, 2021's kind of like, maybe not. They're undrafted free agents. Who knows if they'll even make the team? But down the line, if they can make the team, get off the scout team, make the NFL 53, I like these guys for the future.
I hit it at the park, bend bones. See me high step to the end zone. My life like a game, Nintendo. Playing with the best, let them know. Get off the track, the train's coming through. Yeah, promise you get in my way, then you best believe I'ma just run over you. Yeah, yeah. Papa turn, taking it back to the house. Defensive joke, I'm laughing so loud. Speed burst good.